All right. This next panel is one that is near and dear, I think, to TechCrunch's heart, and I think all of us really care. The Facebook Newsfeed situation has been going on for the past few weeks, where they switched from editors to an algorithm now. And we've got Facebook's Newsfeed head, Adam Mosseri, here to discuss it. So please welcome Adam to the stage, as well as Josh Constein.
Thank you for coming here. I know you just had a kid, so it's cool that you actually took some time away from paternity leave.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
So transparency has been the big focus for Facebook lately when it comes to the newsfeed. Why, after 10 years since the newsfeed launched, is that so important right now?
Well, I think publishers play a very important part of the ecosystem. So our mission on Newsfeed specifically is to connect people with the stories that matter to them. And publishers create stories that matter to people. And we think it's important that publishers and the people that use our product every day understand how the system works. And actually, I don't think it's right now. For years now, we've been trying to make sure that any major change to Newsfeed, we actually explain and post about proactively before it happens. And we think that's an important part about being transparent and making sure everybody understands how the system works.
That's because there's so much content, right, to show people.
Yeah.
So how much content is possible? How much do you have to sift through just to figure out what goes in someone's newsfeed?
So we're trying to connect people with the stories that matter to them, but it's important to remember that the most important input into what people see is who they decide to friend and what publishers they decide to follow in the first place. Then when they've slowly built up their own experience over time by friending people they care about and following publishers, all that content can show up in their newsfeed. So in any given day, the average person has well over 2,000 stories that they could actually read if they spent a lot of time reading through newsfeed. And they only read about a little over 200, so only about a tenth of the stories that they could actually read, which is why we spend so much time trying to bubble up the ones to the top that we think they'll find most interesting.
That's a big new stat, that only about a tenth of the newsfeed's possible content gets shown, and that's due to the way that you guys filter it. What is the average amount of time that people spend using the newsfeed each day if they're browsing 200 stories?
The last public stat we talked about was over 45 minutes in the US, I think was the last one we talked about publicly. But slowly and steadily over time, people are spending more time reading more, liking more, and commenting more. And we hope that's a signal that we're making the experience more interesting and more relevant to people.
Along those lines, there's been a report from The Information that Facebook has seen a decrease in original sharing, the photos, status updates, not just links of news publishers. Is that true, and what are you guys doing about that?
Sharing is an important part of the ecosystem from friends to friends. It's healthy and it's growing. It's not growing as fast as publisher sharing, so there are more and more publishers posting on Facebook every day, and they're posting more and more often. And one thing we try to do on Newsfeed is make sure that there's a sort of good mix. One of our values is that friends and family come first. Connecting people with their friends and family is the value proposition on which our company was built. It's why most people say that they come to Newsfeed and Facebook in the first place. So we're trying to make sure we do as good a job as possible connecting people with the stories that they find most interesting.
You said that sharing is healthy, but what specifically about original sharing? Is that doing differently than total sharing?
There's different types of sharing. So original sharing would be sharing a photo or a status update or a video, and that's healthy and that's growing. There's public content, like publishers posting articles, and then there's content that's sort of in between. So you might share a link to TechCrunch, and you and I are friends on Facebook, and that's sort of a hybrid. We're friends, but it's also public in nature. And that's also growing. So
does that mean you refute that report from The Information that said that original sharing was decreasing?
Yeah, original sharing is growing. It's not growing as fast as publisher-public sharing.
Got it.
But it is growing.
So I'm honestly addicted to the internet. I read Newsfeed sometimes, and then I just refresh it for no reason. I'll keep looking at it on my phone, and then I'll refresh it on the desktop. I'll go in a loop between Facebook and Twitter and email. I'm lucky that I get paid to actually cover and write about Facebook. But
yeah.
Do you think that people can use Newsfeed so much that it turns into an addiction?
Our mission on Newsfeed is to connect people with stories they find meaningful, not to get people to use it absolutely as much as possible. One way we look at success. We really look at success in two different ways. There's what people do, so are they liking and commenting more, are they spending more time, are they reading more, but also what people say. So we run tens of thousands of surveys every day all over the world, and we ask people about the quality of the experience that they have, and we try to make sure that the time that people spend in Newsfeed reading stories is time that they feel good about. And we do that by taking their feedback very seriously and iterating on the experience.
So you said that you're not trying specifically to make people use it as much as possible. Do you do anything in the product that discourages people from addictive behaviors?
What we try and do is show people this content that they find the most interesting.
But that seems like it would cause addiction.
I think ideally we're showing people content that they find meaningful, and then they feel good about the time that they're spending. And if they're not feeling good about the time that they're spending, then they would actually spend less time on Facebook. And I think what's so important is that we don't only look at what people do, how much time do they spend, but also how do they self-report their feeling about the quality of the experience. And we do that in a number of different ways.
I mean, Facebook's known to track tons of different metrics about user engagement. Do you track anything about metrics around addiction? You know, any behavior patterns that you say, this looks like someone who's in an addictive loop. They might not be doing something that actually makes them feel better. And in fact, if we leave them doing this, they may have a worse experience with Newsfeed and use it less in the future. Do you track any metrics around addiction?
We track. The closest thing would be we track sentiment. So how do you feel about your time? Do you think it's time well spent is something that we ask. Are these stories meaningful? And to try to get a qualitative understanding of the quality of the experience people have, that would be the closest thing to what you're asking.
Are there any specific user groups that you guys are really trying to improve the metrics around? I've heard of something called marginally engaged users. Is that a type of people that you're trying actively to increase the usage of?
I'm not sure I've heard that term used at Facebook. I think the group that jumps out that I would like to talk about a bit is people in developing markets, particularly India. India is an amazing country, but only 19% of them are online. And as they're coming online for the first time, there are massive, there's just a lot of them. They're a big source of growth for us. So we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to make sure the experience in India, where you've got 2G networks for most people, internet's intermittent, most phones are Android and at the low end. How can we make sure that that experience is as good and as meaningful as for us here in the Valley who have fancy iPhones and fast internet connections?
Do you think in the end, though, that Facebook has responsibility to educate people about internet addiction or help them avoid it?
I think anybody who builds a product or a service has a responsibility to those people the people who use that product or that service. So our mission at Facebook is to make the world more open and connected. So we have a responsibility to make sure that we're a platform for all ideas. As a platform for all ideas where people can express any opinion, we also have a responsibility to make sure people are safe, which is why we've got community standards around content. But maybe most importantly, we have a responsibility to make sure that people are finding value in the time that they spend with Newsfeed and with Facebook. And we do that by trying to make sure that for each of the billion-plus people that will open up Facebook today, that Newsfeed is as possibly an interesting experience as we can make it.
If you say that the average usage time is about 45 minutes a day, there's going to be lots of people who are much less than that. So naturally, there should be lots of users that are much more than that.
Sure.
Do you think that there's some hour mark? Would 3 hours of Facebook Newsfeed browsing a day, would that be too much?
I don't think there's a specific number. I think different people...
What about like 8 hours?
8 hours? I think that different people use Facebook in different ways. So here we probably use it to connect with friends and maybe read some news. In some parts of the world, Newsfeed is an important source of uncensored news. We see a lot of variance. In the Middle East, people comment a lot more. They have much more active conversations. The countries that use stickers the most are Thailand and India, which is interesting because they're not physically or culturally proximate in any way. And so for each person, I think the right amount of time depends on their own needs and their own life. And so I don't pretend to have a universal answer for that.
You mentioned uncensored content, so I want to get into that topic a bit. So Facebook recently fired the humans that wrote the descriptions for its trending topics, which aren't necessarily in the newsfeed but appear next to it, and a lot of people think of it as a part of the feed. you guys fired those curators and stripped out the description, so you can't tell at a glance what they're about. Do you think that that's a better experience?
So trending is a separate system from Newsfeed, as you mentioned.
Right, but is that a better experience?
I think so. I think for a few reasons. One, we wanted to be clear in the wake of a lot of feedback about our role and the role of people in the trending product. And I think the trending product is good, but has a lot of room to improve. But two, most of our users don't speak English, and those captions were only in English. And a system where we talk about the topic and the number of people speaking about the topic actually scales better internationally, and we care a lot about scaling.
That makes sense, but at the same time, you have plenty of money. I mean, Facebook earned $2 billion in profit last quarter alone. It seems like, the 15 or so people that were hired to do this curation, to leave those descriptions, even if only in English, which is one of your most important and biggest languages in some of your most lucrative markets, can't you guys afford to keep those curators on?
I don't think it was a question of affording. I think it was a question about what was the right experience and what could scale to everybody. We tried to make sure that we have one experience that adapts based on people's usage across the world, and not to have different types of products in different countries, because that becomes much more difficult to maintain and execute well on.
Is that a lowest common denominator strategy?
If not executed well, I think if executed well, you build a system that grows and adapts. So as you get more sophisticated, the app becomes more interesting or adds more features, etc. But if you don't execute it well, then yeah, that would be the pitfall.
I mean, honestly, I don't think you guys are executing it well. You said that you think it's a better experience, but as soon as you remove the human curators, there's a fake story about Megyn Kelly that showed up from a basically fake news source. There was a truther article saying that 9/11 was an inside job. That was a trend on Facebook that you guys said was something legitimate to show people.
There's a lot of room for improvement, not only with trending, but also with Newsfeed. We think a lot about how to make the process or how to make the experience better over time. So those examples are false news and hoaxes. We've actually spent a lot of time on Newsfeed trying to reduce their prevalence in the ecosystem. I think we're doing now some more similar work and trying to improve the experience in a similar way.
Does it seem premature, perhaps, that you guys have moved away from using humans to avoid any of that controversy, but instead you sort of sacrifice the user experience with these more fake news stories that any normal human curator would have been able to catch?
I don't think so, because actually what we removed was people who actually write those headlines. The process by which stories show up in trending didn't change with the people that you're referring to. That was a mistake that could have happened before this change. That doesn't mean that it's okay. We have to make sure that the experience is better. But I don't think that had to do with the specific change you're asking about.
So Slate talked to some of the former curators that worked on that team, and some of them said that user feedback on the revised version of Trends without the descriptions, that the feedback from users was overwhelmingly negative, and that Facebook knew that when it launched the product. Why would it launch it something anyway if it seemed worse?
This is trending you're talking about?
Yeah.
I don't know the specifics. I spend most of my time on Newsfeed. I think, though, that it's worth calling out that we have values and we have standards, and those values and standards are reflected in the decisions we make about Newsfeed, about trending, and about all of the products. We actually made those values public a few months ago. I can go through them if you're interested. And those values have been true for a long period of time, and they affect the decisions we make, and then they therefore in turn affect the quality of people's experiences. We think that, the last value is about iteration. So we know that the experience isn't as good as it can be. We know we have room to improve. We're very open to feedback about how, and we think of this as a journey that's just getting started.
So you talked about the Newsfeed's values. How does Facebook plan to handle the inclusion of graphic but newsworthy content in the Newsfeed, such as police shootings or historical nude photos?
Sure. So our community standards, which are about what stories are allowed on Facebook, primarily revolve around safety. So they prohibit things like nudity or soliciting violence. We had an incident which you're sort of referring to that last week around a photo from Tibet during the Vietnam War that got taken down. It was posted by a news organization in Norway. That photo violated our community standards because there was nudity in it. We then received a lot of feedback very quickly that this photo was, yes, there was nudity, but it was of historical importance. It's actually an iconic photo from the Vietnam War. And so we reinstated, or we put that photo back up, and we're iterating on our policy to make room for that type of content. And our standards have been relatively stable for a long period of time, but they are a work in progress the same way our product is. And we take the feedback that we get from publishers and from the people who use Facebook every day very seriously. And so we're looking at how to improve those all the time.
So in the case of the Philando Castile shooting video, this man died on Facebook Live. It was a very tragic situation. And Facebook said that a technical glitch caused the video to disappear for several hours. Do you stand by that explanation?
Yeah, we have a lot of systems in place to try and automatically detect content that violates our standards, and we actually had a sort of a categorization essentially, which is really a bug and really, really unfortunate about such an important story at such an important moment.
What was the categorization?
I don't have the specifics because that's actually part of the Protect and Care team, which works on things like community standards and spam.
It seems like a technical glitch. I think when I think of what those words mean, it means like something in engineering, like the data just kind of disappeared. It wasn't that there was some user-driven decision, even if it was them building a piece of software that made the decision, in this case, a categorization. So was it presumably categorized as graphic violence that was senseless and not necessarily newsworthy? Or
I don't have the specifics, but I'm sure whatever the system was in place didn't perform as it was intended. We shouldn't have taken that down. We didn't mean to.
So you did take it down, though. It wasn't that it just accidentally disappeared.
No, I don't have the specifics, but so I shouldn't guess, but when I say we took it down, I don't mean someone decided to take a photo down or that story down. I mean the system, what is important is that story disappeared for a period of time, and that shouldn't have happened.
I think this brings up a bigger question about whether it's okay to offend people with content that appears in the newsfeed, if that's important. Sometimes the world is an offensive place, but that's what educates us about what's important. Do you think it's okay for people to be offended while reading the newsfeed?
Yeah, I think the important thing is that people are seeing stories that resonate with them, that are meaningful to them, not that they're stories that don't offend or the stories that they agree with necessarily.
So at the top of this, you said that Facebook was making decisions about the newsfeed, about whether something should be censored, or whether something is censored or not. Is Facebook a media company or a technology platform company?
We think of ourselves as a technology company because primarily the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis are technology problems. So we're trying to figure out what people are interested in. We're trying to figure out how to connect people with the sources of content that they find meaningful. We're trying to figure out how to rank stories based on how relevant they are to people. And these problems are primarily technical in nature, which is why we think of ourselves as a technology company. That said, we know we play a meaningful role in media. A lot of people read their news on Facebook and read other types of media on Facebook. And so it's important to us that we are good partners with publishers in the media industry and that we're as transparent as possible about how things work.
If you say that you're not a media company, but you're making decisions in terms of your community guidelines about what appears and what doesn't, what is your responsibility to users to disseminate when you're disseminating news?
Our responsibility is to make sure that we're a platform for all ideas, like I said before, that people are safe, that people are finding value in the time that they spend on Facebook. But we're not in the business of deciding what issues people should read about, which you could contrast with a traditional newspaper, which would have an editorial board and pick a set of issues every day that they think are the most important and everybody should read. And they write those stories, and they do a really good job of that. We don't create content. We're not in that business.
But you guys do weigh decisions about whether something is more historically important than it is offensive and whether it should appear or not. And I think that sounds a lot like a typical editor of a newspaper about saying this might be offensive, this might be graphic, but it's important to our readers for them to know about this. If Facebook's making those similar decisions in a way, doesn't that make it a media company?
I don't think so. We have values. Our values are to connect people with their friends and family, to inform people about the world around them, to entertain people, to be a platform for all ideas, to prioritize authentic content, to give people control over the experience, and to iterate. Those are our 7 newsfeed values. And we have standards which are actually not focused on offensive content, but focused on safety. things like not soliciting violence. And our nudity policy actually primarily revolves around safety, not around offending people. Those standards and those values are reflected in the decisions we make about policy, about how we enforce policy and ranking and in design, and they affect people's experiences. But we think that's different than what a traditional newspaper would do, which would be pick a set of stories and decide these are the stories that people should read.
Well, sometimes I feel like when stories disappear because of a miscategorization, you guys are making those decisions. But it's certainly fascinating to hear that you guys have, 2,000 stories that could appear in people's feed every day, but you're managing to whittle it down to just 10%. You don't seem to be tracking things around internet addiction, though you do admit that it's a responsibility of anyone making a product to take care of the safety of their users, and that the trends could certainly improve, though you seem to think that it's okay to get rid of the humans, even if that decreases what some people perceive as quality, as long as it makes it more scalable, and that Facebook does need to get a better handle on how to remove or hide graphic content without taking away or censoring things that are really important. So I'm excited to see how this evolves as you guys figure out, if you're a technology company, what does that mean as a responsibility to the media? So thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers.
Cheers.